We are just about ready to go live. So please just bear with me for just a moment while we get everything squared away the way it needs to be. Yeah. Okay. And we want to also get our Instagram friends in on this. So we will just pop right over to Instagram right now and get this happening there as well. Hey there and welcome. We are just getting ready to go live with another iridology training on Instagram Live, on Facebook Live, and via webinar. We've got all the technology working today, and that just makes it so much more fun. Yeah. Don't you love this? I love that I can actually share all this great information with people all over the world. And so as we are getting ready to do this, I am just going to flip my, actually we'll do it this way, I guess. There we go, flip that around. And set this up. There we go. Okay, fabulous. I'm going to turn off the light behind me. And I hope that doesn't make it too dark in here, but at least it gets rid of that glow over my head. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you are with me. My name is Judith Cobb. I am a master herbalist, registered nutritional consulting practitioner, and a comprehensive certified iridology instructor. Or certified comprehensive. I can never remember which order those go in. And so I am really happy to be with you today. And we are going to explore the concept of, is iridology a diagnostic tool? So good to have you joining me on Instagram Live, on Facebook Live, and via webinar. It's wonderful to have all of these technologies to share all of this information with. I'm just going to also grab my chat box. There we go, for those of you who are with me on Zoom. So if you are with me on the webinar, give me a greeting, let me know that you're there. And those of you who are with me on Instagram and Facebook, thank you for being there. When we look at iridology and is this a diagnostic tool, we want to be understanding what the terminology means, right? So iridology as a diagnostic tool, diagnosis, to diagnose something means to name the disease. And so when we go to the doctor or the naturopath and they run tests and they analyze the results and they come up with the name of the disease, they typically create their protocol based on the disease name. When we are doing iridology, we don't quite do it like that. Actually, as iridologists, we are not allowed to diagnose. But let's look at some photos and see what kinds of things we can see in a set of eyes. This is a beautiful set of eyes from a 10-year-old boy who is a client of mine. He has a doctor diagnosis of ADHD, which his parents are not happy about, although they recognize that he has some of the behaviors of ADHD. So just before we talk about this, I do want to launch into a little bit of a soapbox, if I may, please. The question for today is iridology a diagnostic tool? And I see so many posts online from people who are posting their iridology photos asking, please tell me what's wrong with me and what I can do about it, or please tell me what you see and what supplements I should take or what foods I should eat. And iridology is not a crystal ball. It is not a party game. It is an assessment tool. The answer to, is iridology a diagnostic tool, is actually no. It is an assessment tool. The iRides teach us which questions to ask. The eyes don't actually give us the answers. And so as we know that, if we know that, then we know that the eyes don't give us the names of diseases. On their own, the eyes don't even tell us what recommendations to make for a client. Again, iridology is not a crystal ball. It is not a party game. It is an assessment tool. So as we look at this, we're actually going to look at 6 specific cases today. So if you love looking at eyes, you're in the right place. We're going to look at 6 specific cases and look at what these eyes actually tell us and what questions they make us want to ask to get the information we need to create an accurate assessment and to create a protocol. I've worked a lot with children who have the doctor's diagnosis of ADHD. The majority of these children have contraction furrows. So as we look at these eyes, we see contraction furrows. That's these rings coming around, donut rings or target rings, however you want to describe them. Many of these children also have radial furrows, or the lines that radiate outwards like spokes on a wheel. Interesting, though, that I've worked with people of all ages who have these markers. But anecdotally, it appears that while all children who have the diagnosis of ADHD have these markers, not all people who have these markers have ADHD. Do you understand that correlation? Having these markers doesn't guarantee ADHD, but it does increase the likelihood. These markers together suggest that a person may burn through their B vitamins, vitamin C, calcium, and magnesium very quickly. When they are properly nourished for their needs, they like to have to-do lists, and they like to have a direction in what they are doing. They like to accomplish things. This set of markers is not enough to label anybody with ADHD. We have to ask additional questions. Some of those questions would be things like, what are this child's sleep patterns? How does he handle stress or frustration or anxiety? What is his best learning method? And when we understand, and when we've got answers to those questions and we understand how those answers integrate with one another, we can more accurately create a program for this client. This is a young woman who came to me in her late 20s. She was married. She wanted to have children, but she'd had a diagnosis from the doctor of polycystic ovarian syndrome. I've done a lot of work with infertility and especially with PCOS. And one of the ones that I don't know if we're going to look at her today, I don't remember what I've got in the slide deck, also had a diagnosis of MTHFR defect. So looking at this specific eye that we're seeing on the screen, this lovely blue eye, which means it falls into the lymphatic category, this is going to give us some more whys of why this woman has PCOS. So she is polyglandular. Lymphatic is her constitutional type. Polyglandular is one of her physical integrity subtypes. Polyglandular means she has a lot of these closed petal shapes that are attached directly to the collarette. When we see polyglandular, we know that she is going to be more prone to different types of imbalances, and specific blood sugar imbalances and hormone imbalances. She had a habit of eating very poorly, very high carbohydrate diet. And so when we understand that she is prone to endocrine imbalances, which does include the blood sugar imbalances, and when we know she's got a high carbohydrate diet, that pushes her directly towards insulin resistance and directly towards polycystic ovarian syndrome. We did some major diet revamping with her. We totally cleaned it up. She got rid of all the carbs. She started exercising. And within a very short period of time, she actually got pregnant successfully. And she's had 4 successful pregnancies, and she has really great menstrual cycles. Now, one of the questions that we want to ask these people, some of the questions we want to ask women who have the polyglandular subtype, particularly if they have infrequent or very irregular menstrual periods, is we want to know, do they crave carbs? Do they eat carbs? What is their menstrual cycle frequency? Are they having cycles less frequently than every 6 weeks? Because if she is, then that is, by definition, one of the key symptoms of polycystic ovarian syndrome. So again, there was nothing in her eye that said she was PCOS. She came in with that medical diagnosis. Looking at her eyes, I was able to understand why her body had gone that way and what we needed to do to help her get back into balance. This is another instance of a client who has polycystic ovarian syndrome. She came to me and she wanted to get pregnant. She and her husband had been trying for 3 years. She'd had 1 miscarriage. They'd had no further success in conceiving. As we started talking and as I looked at her eyes, I asked her what was her menstrual history. And she said her cycles typically were 60 to 90 days apart. And so I asked her if she also had a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. And she said, well, yes, she did. And so I asked her if they had ever suggested that she had polycystic ovarian syndrome. And she said, yeah, they had mentioned that as well. But nobody ever had suggested changing her nutrition. Now, when we see this eye, it's very different from the last eye we looked at, isn't it? This is not a blue eye. It is not a polyglandular eye. Instead, it's what we call an anxiety tetanic eye. But specifically, she has dark brown eyes. And when we see these dark brown eyes, it suggests that she probably needs to be getting her B vitamins in a specific format. The regular, inexpensive B vitamins that you would buy in any health food store or a drugstore or a big box department store will not meet her needs. She likely needs them methylated. And so we got her the methylated Bs. We cleaned up her diet, which was really awful to begin with, totally cleaned it up. And her husband was such a sweetheart. He came to every appointment with her and he said he would take over the cooking if it meant it would make it easier for her. And that's exactly what he did. We got her being active. She doesn't like to work out. She doesn't like to exercise, but we got her to understand the importance of being physically active every day for 30 minutes and how that would help to reverse or control the type 2 diabetes or the insulin resistance. She did all of that and she got pregnant. She did not develop gestational diabetes, which is very unusual for a polycystic ovarian mom who also has a type 2 diabetes diagnosis from the doctor. She delivered a healthy 7-pound baby boy at term. So when I look at these eyes, the questions I want to ask when I see the contraction furrows here is how well does she handle stress? And again, what are her cravings? Because we're going to find that she doesn't handle stress particularly well. She tries to avoid stress, which most of us do, but when she gets stressed, it really affects her physically. And so we had to make sure we got the right B vitamins in. We had to get her exercising. We had to get her eating foods that would support her rather than drag her down. So many people medicate with carbohydrates because it gives them a temporary high, but it doesn't give them even energy for the long term. So we cleaned her up, evened her out, and things improved tremendously for her. This is another client who came to me. She was 20 years old, not married, not wanting to have a baby right now, but knowing she wanted to get married in the future and knowing that she wanted to have children. And so she wanted to get healthy. She was coming in primarily because she was gaining weight, and she couldn't figure out why she was gaining weight. It didn't take us long to figure out what was going on. What we soon discovered was, as we talked to her, that and took her pictures, is she has one particular marking. And I don't know if you'll see this very clearly on the Instagram since we're shooting my computer screen with my phone. But right here, she has where this fiber lifts up off the surface of the iris and then it reattaches. So it's like there's a little pathway underneath that we could slip a microscopic needle under. That has a really strong correlation to the genetic predisposition of not handling carbs well. So when I saw that in her eyes and I understood she had gained about 10 pounds in the last 5 or 6 months, I asked her about her menstrual cycles. And she said they were typically very, very regular. And I said, does that mean they're 4 weeks apart? And she said, well, 4 weeks plus about 3 or 4. So I said, does that mean that you're having a cycle about every 60 days, every 2 months? She said, yeah, that's about right. Okay, we've got that figured out. That, again, is a key symptom of polycystic ovarian syndrome. Polycystic ovarian syndrome almost always involves type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. And so I asked her, what do you eat? Well, she was a university student living on campus using the meal plan, which is a very carbohydrate heavy food program. We had to do some investigating with her then. Did she have facilities to prepare some of her own meals? Yes, she did. Could she reasonably get to a grocery store? Well, she didn't have a car, but she was going to school in Hawaii, and that meant that walking to the grocery store is not a problem because the weather is never lousy. So that was great. So she could walk, and it was about a 1-mile trip each way. Perfect. Could she do that twice a week? Yes, she could. Could she buy protein and lots of leafy greens? Yes, she could. So we really started working on her diet with getting more protein into her at regular intervals. We started working with getting way more fresh produce into her, and we got her walking. That began to even things out for her very quickly. But the tip-off for me was seeing this one particular marking coupled with the contraction furrows. I knew she was burning through her Bs and that she would need the methylated Bs. Here again, we have another set of eyes. Now, what you're hearing with this is I am not diagnosing that these women have PCOS from their eyes. In fact, I can't diagnose that they have PCOS at all. I'm not a licensed medical doctor. I am not a licensed medical practitioner who has the legal ability to actually do that for these clients. And so knowing that, I can suggest and I can ask. As we look at this next client, she did not have any diagnoses from the doctor whatsoever. She'd been trying to get pregnant and was not having any success. And she and her husband had tried for a few years. No success, not a miscarriage, nothing. And so as we're looking at her eyes, you will recognize some things that we've seen before. We've got these lacunae attached to the collarette, which suggests she's polyglandular, which means that she is more prone to endocrine imbalances, which can include blood sugars, whoops, did not mean to do that, and reproductive hormones. And so we started working with her on that basis, that her cycles were fairly regular, but as we looked at her temperature charts, she was not having really good ovulation. She did not have a long enough luteal phase. And what that means is if she had conceived, she would not have been able to carry that baby to term. The embryo would not have implanted. And so as we looked at her eyes and we looked at her diet, which was actually really good, we knew we needed to add some supplements to her to get things balanced out. So we used a fairly intense supplement program with her. In the process, she did conceive. Now, there were some tenuous moments during that pregnancy, but she just gave birth about 2 weeks ago to a beautiful baby boy. Now, as we look at her eyes, you may not be able to see it easily again on Instagram. Hopefully you could see this on Facebook, but she's got some little markers down here, this little brown dot right here in particular. So I suggested that she, because of the color and the placement and a few other things I see in her eyes, I suggested that if she was interested, it might be of benefit for her to do a 23andMe test. She did that, and when it came back that she has the MTHFR genetic defect, which she was very upset about. And she said, "What does that mean? I look at all of this report on 23andMe and it's very scary." And I said, "Don't worry about it. We've got you covered." I suspected that from the beginning, could not diagnose it, but I suspected it based on what I saw her temperature charts doing. And I had put her on the proper form of B for an MTHFR defect client. And so that was pretty exciting. Now, again, we can't tell from looking at any of the eyes that we've looked at who has PCOS and who has hormone imbalances. But if we have a doctor's diagnosis that we can ride on and embellish with what we see in the eyes, that can help. Certainly, we look at the eyes and we ask the questions. In this case, it was, how frequent are your periods? What are your periods like? What is your temperature charting like for your basal metabolic temperature? That is often a really good correlate. And we can see that she's also got the wrinkles in her eyeballs, so we know that she burns through her B vitamins. She's actually carries her anxiety very, very poorly. She tends to react very easily to any stress. And so we knew we needed to do some of that support, and that would help her along the way as well. This little diagram is here as a precursor to the next example we are going to look at. Sphincter of Oddi. Sphincter of Oddi. When we look at this, the sphincter of Oddi is right here, right here. So the liver produces bile, which is sent down into the gallbladder and held there for concentration. When we eat something fatty and that fatty food is coming through the small intestines, the gallbladder is supposed to squirt bile out into that fatty food to help us emulsify those fats properly. When people have had their gallbladder removed, we often see what happens is the bile now has a steady drip into the small intestine, whether it's needed there or not. One of the common complications that a lot of people who've had their gallbladder removed are not told about is sphincter of Oddi complications. Now, sphincter of Oddi complications means that this sphincter develops scar tissue or it spasms shut, and it begins to not allow the bile to come through properly. So this is what has happened with one of my clients, and we'll look at his photo next. Just let me see if I've got my notes there. I do. Okay, so these are his beautiful eyes. He had his gallbladder out just a few years ago, and as we look at his eye, we do not see any indication whatsoever of a surgery, because a surgery does not change the genetics of the body. It doesn't change your genetic predisposition. And so as we look at the gallbladder zone, this is his right eye. Gallbladder shows up right in here, just at about the 8 o'clock mark, and there's nothing there to suggest anything's gone wrong. So we have got no indication of a surgery, but now he's got sphincter of Oddi spasms. So again, when we've got that sphincter of Oddi, its goal, its purpose is to help regulate the flow of bile into the small intestine. We see nothing in his eyes. So that means that we can't diagnose sphincter of Oddi problems from the eyes, right? He had to bring that assessment in, and we're really working to try to find an answer for him and some solutions. But a sphincter of Oddi spasm is something that is very difficult to work on because we don't have anything that works specifically on sphincter of Oddi, and we don't know if the spasm is because of scar tissue or because of muscular imbalances in that duct. So as we look at these beautiful lymphatic eyes, and we see that, yeah, he's got some predisposition to a bit of liver, a little bit of kidney kind of issues as well, maybe some lymphatic kinds of issues. There is not a single thing in here that suggests he should have a sphincter of Oddi or a gallbladder problem. We also don't have a specific area in the eye that correlates to sphincter of Oddi. We have a gallbladder area. We have many liver areas, but because of that, we can't diagnose this from the eye at all. He needed to bring in that specific diagnosis for me to understand what was wrong. All right, so there we have it. Wondering where that leaves us. Where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us in the position of understanding that iridology is an assessment tool. It points the way to the questions we should ask. It is not a diagnostic tool. Okay, so it's so important that we keep that in mind. Now, if you're a herbalist or a nutritionist or a naturopath, I invite you to join me for a webinar this afternoon at 5 p.m. to learn more about using iridology in your practice to save you time and to increase client rapport, to stimulate repeat appointments, and to engender loyalty from your clients. And don't we all want repeat business? Yep. And I'm going to just briefly introduce the course here, just so that you know what it's all about. And then I will post the webinar registration link in my profile on Instagram, or in a comment section in Instagram or somewhere, so that you've got that. So the purpose of Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology, the course, is to help practitioners like you assess your clients quickly and accurately. It is also to help you focus on the relevant aspects of your client's health to help you actually be able to do your job more quickly and precisely. It is also to help you get your client programs confidently designed in your paid client time rather than in your unpaid overtime, because I know that so many herbalists, naturopaths, and nutritionists don't get paid for the time they spend designing their client programs. Confident Nutritionist Dynamic Iridology is taught by live webinar. It is taught in 20 2-hour-long classes, so it takes 40 hours to cover the content. All of the learning materials are stored on a student site for ease of use, so that you've got them to go back to review over and over and over again. And there's a lot of support both in class, in our private student Facebook group, and in the extra tutorial sessions that I hold. And that support goes on for you even after you've completed the course, even after you've graduated, and if you choose to certify, even after certification. That support does not end. I do limit my class size to no more than 10 students, just to ensure that each student gets all of the individual attention they need in class. If you are interested, certainly visit iridology.education/priority. There's more information and more registration, and the registration links are there as well. And I will post the registration link for the webinar that's happening at 5 p.m. Mountain Time today on my Instagram and on my Facebook group pages. So that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for being with me. I hope that you found it informative. I hope that you've learned something about iridology and how to use it more effectively, how to avoid some of the traps that are really common out there. And I hope I'll see you later on today. Have a good one. Talk to you later. Bye for now.